Whoa, I'm invisible. There I am. Yes, that was a self-inflicted issue right there. Thankfully, easily solved. Happy Friday, everyone. Back to trying to get back to some kind of normality today. Look at some stuff. I don't have a ton of stuff. Hey, Frederick, I don't have a ton of stuff planned, though. A couple of these articles might be kind of long. I'm not sure. We could probably chat about other things. And of course, I'm always happy to take suggestions and whatnot. And there's always Augur, which I haven't had a chance to look at since yesterday. We could go back in and muck around in there some more. But for the moment, hey, Ian, for the moment, I do have a few things I found. Still, I think what I need to do, well, there's a few things I need to do. I've got a good base list of blogs. I've resuscitated my RSS feeds because I don't want to go back into Reddit, but I need more because I'm finding that some of the blogs that were in that, I forget where the master list came from or the master list that I got came from, but some of them I'm not super interested in. Like one of them's the D&D Beyond blog, and that one doesn't really do anything for me. I'm not really doing much. By the way, maybe I shouldn't open this particular can of worms, but is it just me or a lot of the folks who were talking loudly and proudly of stepping away from 5th edition back when the OGL nonsense happened have kind of backslid back to D&D talk? I guess, I mean, I'm not, I really, I say it, there's some snark there, obviously. However, I don't really mean it because I get it. The creator game, which I am terrible at, is you're supposed to be looking for what your audience is interested in, checking the metrics, and then feeding them what they want. And I think despite what a lot of people wanted to think or whatever numbers there are, and I always go back to those Paizo numbers. If we sold through all this stuff, it's like, okay, that's fine, great. But are people actually playing it? Has it moved the needle in a meaningful way? Yes, you may have sold a bunch of books, but it didn't seem like the needles move. For an example I give, and I don't remember the name of the channel, I don't really want to out people, and I'm not really trying to out them at all because I don't think it's anything bad necessarily. Someone did a lot of let me do builds for you. You know, you just watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Let's see what an Oompa Loompa barbarian build was like, something like that. And I remember I only watched a couple of videos because I'm not really into the builds thing, but I'm almost more fascinated by it just as a cultural phenomenon kind of thing than I am in the actual mechanics itself. I don't want builds. I don't want to build builds really. And I remember seeing that, OGL broke, and they're like, yeah, we're going to do more Pathfinder stuff. Now, he made no claims, and this person made no claims that they were dumping 5e entirely, but there was going to be, we're going to do some Pathfinder stuff. We're going to lean more into Pathfinder. And because I don't watch a lot of the videos, it kind of fell off of my radar or the algorithm on YouTube, whatever. But I remember it's either I went searching out for it because I was thinking to myself, yeah, what happened? What happened with that? And I remember seeing that it was a bunch of 5e stuff. Now, you had some Pathfinder stuff, and then it was, D&D Pathfinder. Then it was like D&D Pathfinder, then D&D Pathfinder, then a bunch of D&D stuff. And I don't think that person's necessarily to blame because I'm sure they looked at it and they wanted to cover more Pathfinder stuff or cover more stuff on something else. But then if no one's watching it, are you what's the word? Cutting off your nose to spite your face kind of thing. The bottom line is you don't necessarily work for Wizards or anything. Obviously, when you make content that is about Wizard stuff, you are kind of bolstering up, but ultimately you're doing it for yourself. And if, frankly, your audience or the audience or people just aren't interested in Pathfinder, regardless of what people on the internet said about, oh yeah, we're ditching WotC, we're never going to do anything WotC again, and yet you put out some Pathfinder stuff, or maybe you put out something else and nobody watches it, and then you say, okay, well, let me see if I put another 5e build. Maybe I had this one already in the, what do they say, in the can, and I'll throw it out there, and then it balloons back to your usual numbers. Then the audience speaks. So I guess maybe I say all that to say, even though I find it a little bit interesting how so many folks who were making big claims have backslid. I think ultimately the problem is us. If we as an audience hold fast to that ideal if we had an ideal. And I think oftentimes what happens is the loud talkers kind of make it seem like something's a bigger thing than it is. The kind of snakes on a plane phenomenon. But if we want real change, it really has to start from us, because all these people are just trying to give us what all the data says that we want. And if we don't change our habits, then we can't look down on them and say, oh, tisk, 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 you didn't follow through with your promise not to cover wizards anymore. Well, the reason why they didn't follow through with it is because they want to continue making a living or whatever they're doing with their channel, their whatever they're making. And it's fine to say, don't do that. But if no one else is going to follow them into the alternative universes, then it would be foolish for them to go. Not only would it just be, why would they go? But it literally be detrimental for them to go. Frederick says the game shop scene out here in Arizona is primarily Pathfinder. 5e eventually got booted from their local store. Interesting. I mean, I was at a few stores yesterday in New York City, and I didn't check their schedules, but I can tell you from shelf space that Pathfinder was almost non-existent. It was like a little bit of Pathfinder, and then a bunch of, I mean, even more, not even necessarily just D&D bigger, but I remember I was at Hexed Company in near Union Square, and I think when I was looking at it, they had a little bit of Pathfinder, and I swear they had more Free League than they did Paizo stuff, and then of course they had a bunch of D&D stuff. I'm sure Pathfinder's strong somewhere, and I'm not really trying to dog Pathfinder, but I find that their fans come out in droves to come out and put out all this stuff, and then I'm just wondering, where is it? Like, next, I'm going to be at ShireCon. ShireCon's a bad example, but when I'm at PAX again in the fall or the winter, last couple times I didn't see any Pathfinder stuff running around. Am I going to see it this year? You know, I don't know. I don't know. But just in general, in terms of the folks who are always championing those alternatives, you got to get people to follow through, right? But I just noticed, just from me looking at kind of YouTube stuff, that it seemed like a lot of creators who had kind of slipped back into their habits. But it makes sense. Again, if nobody's following you, I know when I've covered some kind of indie games and I see that the viewership is next to nil, it makes me, part of me goes like, well, why did I do it? I mean, I know why I did it, because I want to support those games, even if other folks don't. But it's a hard road. It's a hard road. Hey, Magnus, let's see. What did you miss? Well, yesterday we went through the Augur. What did we do before that? Before that, we were looking at, I think before that, the last couple streams, I was going over my Hex template. I think you'll have to go back and look. Goodness, don't ask me what I just did a couple days ago, as if I remember. Frederick says he is announcing a Kickstarter for his Hex system. Who is he, Frederick? Some of the Pathfinder, your Pathfinder folks. I don't know. I don't know who he is, but kudos. Magnus says that Pathfinder somehow seems hugely popular and yet really niche somehow. Yes, it's a weird thing. I mean, I don't doubt that they sold a lot of books because people were fiery with emotions and wanted to kind of stick it to WotC, so they did. But I mean, I saw something on YouTube, just the headline, and Wizards is coming out with a ton of books. People are talking about a bunch of their books. I guess just from just looking at my own, I want to say, what is it? My own window onto the world. If I could chart it, I could definitely chart and see a big spike in sort of others or claiming to, or big, no, I don't want to say claims, because I'm not trying to really, it's not like fraudulent, some kind of fraudulent things going on, but a lot of people talking really strongly about moving on from WotC. And I've just noticed, and it's not even really me noticing it just now, I've noticed it for a while now, that there was a January, February, whatever, last year, or the beginning of this year, a huge spike of people like, yeah, we're going elsewhere. And then there's just, I'm following the same channels, right? I'm looking at the same social media stuff. I haven't changed my window. My window's still looking out in the same environment. It just feels like if I had been in a coma from before the what do you call it? The OGL crisis. And then now I'd be hard pressed, other than seeing a snarky comment here and there, that it ever happened at all. It feels like if I just slept through, went to bed, whatever, November, whenever before it started, December, I don't know, and I woke up now. Oh, what's going on? And I go and I check all the socials for the last. No, I'm not gonna, I don't go all the way back in there, but for the last little bit and just see what's happening on different YouTube channels that get thrown up in my feed and all this stuff. I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have been like, wow, that guy's now doing Pathfinder. Oh my gosh, what happened? These people are doing these other games now. Cool. Like, no, it just feels like same old, same old. I don't know. Magna says it never seemed to be as popular as fans want it to be. Yeah, no, I agree. I think the thing is that I guess the reason why I always feel like I bring up Pathfinder is that what seems to be frustrating is that just, again, in my own personal experience, I see the people online who are championing it, not constantly, but a lot. Though even that I feel like has died down, but maybe because I'm not on Reddit anymore, where I used to see more of those, hey, you should be playing Pathfinder kind of things. There's the champion part, but I feel like even that's died down. But there's that follow through. It's fine to be on the internet and say you should be trying Pathfinder 2. You should be trying Pathfinder 2. It's like, okay, that's great, but where are you like out in the world? If I go to a gaming store, if I go to a con, like where are the people who are like, hey man, I'm putting my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to run some Pathfinder because I feel like it's criminally underrated and it does do a lot of these things that I think people who enjoy 5th edition but maybe annoyed by X, Y, or Z aspects of it would enjoy. So I am going to run Pathfinder at my con. I don't see it. I saw a guy running more Borg at a con. I've seen other people running other things at a con. I see people, all kinds of games being run. Didn't see a lot of Pathfinder. Didn't see a lot of Pathfinder at the last PAX Unplugged. Didn't see, I don't think, any at PAX East. So it's just, I see this disconnect between what the internet was, what you see from kind of internet folks and then real world stuff. But I'm in a very narrow, so it's very much, I'm making a very, very thin sort of straw man in terms of my own experiences and other folks to speak to. Obviously, Frederick might be in Fortress Pathfinder over there in Arizona, where they're booting D&D out in favor of Pathfinder, and that's awesome. And it's just great that there's something different over there, but it hasn't been my experience. Magda says the problem with WotC is they've adopted the approach of quantity over quantity, and then gaslight people into thinking they're somehow XYZist for not shelling out. Eventually, I don't know that I feel like they're gaslighting people. I mean, well, I guess we have probably separate WotC, the company, from maybe fans of. They definitely are putting out more and more now, or at least they have planned. And I guess which I guess is a good thing. The stuff they're putting out in the future, if you're interested in that, is going to be kind of forward compatible, more or less. They're, I guess, going to be in line with 1D there. That way you're not in that weird spot of buying a book at the end of a system's lifespan where it's like, well, why am I going to buy this book now? And in 2 months, they're going to come out with the next one. I'm guessing that which I think they started with something else where they're kind of moving because of they're fairly compatible with each other, mostly compatible with each other. They can sort of tweak things and kind of move it in that way. I mean, it's kind of funny because I remember it's just interesting how that it's shifted, because for a while people were thinking 5th edition, why aren't they releasing more books? And now people are saying they're releasing too many books. I don't know. I can't even remember the last one that I read. And since the OGL, I've been trying to pretty much decide I'm just going to sort of stay away from it. And I wasn't doing that much anyway, so it's not like a big loss for the 5e community that I'm not covering more 5e stuff. But I just wish that maybe they would do more different kinds of things, or maybe that's not what I mean. I can see how they're doing. I mean, I guess what I mean is that I feel like their adventures are kind of all of a certain style in terms of just how they present them. Maybe Strahd was maybe the best example. That, or maybe Tomb of Annihilation of them. I guess maybe I just wish for more in the old school vein of give us some more open worldy kind of things and give us some room to spread around and kind of make our own adventures in there. And I think Curse of Strahd does that, and I guess Tomb of Annihilation does that to some degree, but a lot of them are very kind of narrative linear, which is not my love to begin with. Ian says that the problem with WotC is a focused goal on short-term investor profits on the most under-monetized role-playing game. Yeah, that's true too. I mean, that's the thing is, that it goes back to that what I said before. Corporations are going to do, or I think I say corporations are going to corporate. They're going to do corporate stuff, and public corporations, it's even worse because they're kowtowing to investors who, by the way, do not care a whit about role-playing games. They just care about those numbers, and it definitely skews people's thinking. I mean, even before we get to the public, I mean, you can see the difference between what do people call it, like a gamer gygax, kind of garage band gygax versus corporate gygax, where it just point of view changes it. And there were practical reasons for that on some level. I get it. With organized play, you're trying to focus some more on stuff that kind of changes your perspective, but a lot of it was also we want to lock this stuff down for business reasons. And then the further you get into corporate structures, especially when you're talking about parent companies who, at least in TSR, better or worse, they were people who were gamers trying their hand at being businessmen, and you could talk about how poorly they fared at that. But when you're getting Wizards of the Coast, maybe you could say that Wizards of the Coast is kind of gamery and businessy. Maybe, I don't know. But when you get beyond them to their overlords, it's all, business. Okay, enough of that. Let's see what this. So this one, I forget where I got this from. This wasn't from my feed. I think I saw this might have been posted to Mastodon. It's an interesting take or series of takes. I think I did read this one, or at least go through it, but I wanted to read it again, and this is the perfect opportunity. So let's do it. So this is from the Ponderings on Games blog at pondeриngsongames.com. This is posted on the 5th, called the OSR Contradiction. It was posted by Magician. For a while now, I have struggled with fully comprehending the OSR playstyle. It's documented. I've run several campaigns in my approximation of it. I wrote about a couple of OSR games. I even wrote an adventure for one of them, out soon. And I still don't feel like I'm doing it right. That is, until I had an epiphany. It's not a coherent design philosophy, and I need to stop treating it as such, which may well be obvious to you, but it's my blog and my epiphany, so here we are. And before we get going, what even is OSR? A featherless dice game, perhaps? At this point, it is impossible to pin down. I have no interest in community turmoil, so by OSR, I mean the play style and common mechanics supporting it. At the same time, I have no doubt there are examples of OSR, post-OSR, NSR, etc. games with totally different playstyle mechanics, which I think only supports my argument, but just to be safe, don't worry, your favorite game is entirely self-consistent. But back to the topic at hand. A while back, I wrote about the difficulty of mastering narrative games. Is this a recurring theme here? With the ultimate conclusion being that narrative games embed their desired playstyle into the rules, not always well communicated and not always well implemented. And failure to follow this playstyle results in a clunky experience as you fight the rules to make them fit your playstyle. OSR games, on the other hand, rely on maxims and manifestos, often existing outside the game text. As someone who didn't start off with this playstyle and didn't have other GMs that practiced it I could learn from, such posts were an obligatory reading, but may have left the wrong impression. So I guess the first thing is, and we're going to get into this, right? Because this is another, if you remember, there was a while back we read a post that was trying to give context to those manifestos, trying to explain kind of how they came from, sort of what they meant, and maybe where they've gone. The interpretation of what they mean now has kind of left what they were originally intended as. And Magna says their favorite maxim of OSR design is to focus on gameable material, essentially balancing crunch and fluff. Yep, I think that's a good point. But the thing is, I don't think that OSR games rely on the manifestos. I don't think that if you get, I don't know, you pick up Cairn, you pick up Mork Borg, for example, or even you go back and pick up BX, which is in my little white folder here, especially something like BX, does not rely on Maxim's manifestos because those things didn't exist back then. So I think if you call your game an OSR game, I don't think you're implicitly relying on these maxims that but there is a big emphasis on following the maxims and manifestos or agreement with same. And he's gonna get more into Am I back? Am I back? Can you hear me? Can you see me? Am I here? Am I not here? Somebody let me know what's going on. All right, I can't tell. Okay, I'm back. I'm not sure what happened. The web interface was, you see me? Okay. Sloring Scott says that in OSR games, you solve problems with equipment more often, and in new games, you solve problems with skills. That's probably true. I mean, I definitely think there's more of a. I definitely think you're more likely to look at your skills first because you have them, right? And BX, you don't have any skills unless you're a thief. So outside of those thief things, and if then yeah, you have to look at like, well, what can I do with either just my two hands and my physical thing, or with stuff that I have. Here's a swig of just cold water for the working man. What I was trying to say is that the maxims and manifestos are separate from the gaming rules or the gaming text, as they say, often outside the text. But I feel like they're making a connection that's not necessarily there. I suppose I'd have to poll people. I don't know how many folks were making, maybe some later ones were trying to take the manifestos and maxims and feed them back in. But the basis of the old school OSR is from these old school games, whether they're trying to get some spiritual resemblance or more of a retro clone type thing. And those games predated the Maxims manifestos by eons. So I feel like saying that the games rely on them is incorrect. I think what the Maxims manifestos are trying to do is present a cogent philosophy based on a romantic nostalgia. How's that? Hey, Brian Smith. Okay, back to this. So I'm just going to repeat this paragraph just in case it got munged out. OSR games, on the other hand, rely on maxims and manifestos, often existing outside the game text. As someone who didn't start off with this playstyle and didn't have other GMs that practiced it I could learn from, such posts were an obligatory reading but may have left the wrong impression. One such maxim is rulings over rules. Here's the description from the Principia Apocrypha, a quote-unquote new OSR primer. The primeval old school principle, old school game style games are often sparse in what situations their rules cover. They are often minimal or no quote-unquote skills or quote-unquote feats. This is a feature, not a bug. The flexibility this openness allows is a big part of the appeal of old school style games. Let players take advantage of this openness and try crazy things and apply logic to taste. All right. So one of the things here, right, is, again, my take on this is, and I think this is Matt. Is this Matt Smith? No, wait. Sorry, I forget who wrote this. I forget. Anyway, I suppose I could open it up. Who did the Principia Apocrypha? Oh, that's okay. So this is the one that's Ben Milton, Stephen Lumpkin, and David Perry. Okay, that's that one. So I was thinking the wrong one. So here's the deal. Whoops. Here is the dealio. This is, again, looking back at the old games and trying to form a philosophy based on them. Something that I read, I think it might have it on my phone here. Matt Finch is who I was thinking, but yeah, but that's a different one, right? I was thinking Matt Finch, but that was actually different. I actually took a photo of this, which I think I have on my phone that I can reference really quick. Hold on a minute. If I can find it. Can I find it? Will I find it? Hold on a minute. Where is it? I'll have to find it later. But basically, there was a letter that Gary Gygax wrote in 1975 to a magazine, a zine, and I forget the zine, the name of the zine. Any case, he basically says that the reason why the white box is kind of incomplete and as is was because they just wanted to get it out. They felt like they could be working on it for years, and they didn't want to wait years to get it out there. And he said, well, we don't want it, we want people to be able, we find it so much fun. We want you to be able to play it sooner rather than later. So rather than trying to be completionist with the rules, we're going to release it to the wild. Whether that's true or whether there's a little bit of, hey, we don't know if other people are going to release similar things because, different gaming groups are starting to play this stuff and get out there, and we just want to get it out to be first to market. I don't know. But in any case, they put it out there. It wasn't that they were looking at it, I don't think, thinking of these things. I do think that they thought, at least, garage band punk gamer Gygax, was that you can take this and make the game that you want. And I think in that same letter, he talks about how him and Artisan don't play the same way. And he doesn't feel like anybody really plays the same way. And he feels like everybody shouldn't play the same way. And so if you wrote out all the rules, you would basically be coming up with a single system that everybody should play. And he actually thought that was a really bad thing, which is funny when you get to AD&D, DMG, Gary Gygax. But at the time, that was his thought. Like, man, everyone has such different ideas, different ways of playing, different things of doing, that we're going to leave a lot of things open-ended so that you can fill it and make the game fit the shape of your ideas. That's what it was. It was not like what we feel like rulings over rules. No, because I think the whole idea was that you would eventually house rule, which is what people do. You see people with really long-running games, most of them have probably enough house rules to have made a good-sized book. Someone's got a whole handbook full of house rules, and that was the idea. Well, you come up with the rules that work for you, and you'll fill in. So at some point, you will have, we probably say, a standard, moderate amount of rules covering the things that you're interested in. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you're not interested in. And of course, we also have to remember this is the very beginnings of things. So people hadn't developed some of the ideas that we develop now, like having universal universal systems for basically figuring out everything. Like, we don't know whatever, but we can go down some kind of checklist and figure out how to adjudicate it, how to mechanize it. That was something that developed over time. These are the very first books that came out, the very first thoughts, the very first attempts at it. And that stuff just wasn't in mind. And then later on, I think people looking back at it were probably coming at it saying, why do I like this? Why do I like this sparse rule book more than I like the books that are tomes? And then working that way to figure out this maxim, if that makes sense. Whoa, a whole bunch of stuff happened in the chat. Michael Fraker says, I've always struggled to know what the right way to do something. I've always struggled to know what the right way to do something that is weird, right? As in, it works best at the table and what is in line with the intent of the rules. I think a lot of people struggle with that. I mean, even in 5th edition, which spells things out pretty plainly, has a lot of that, right? That whole rules as written versus rules as intended, and what was intended, and what are they trying to do? there's there's a lot. And I think part of the thing is just don't worry about it, because you only got to worry about your table. I mean, look, and Michael Frager, you're not alone. I mean, that's one of those stories of people calling Gary Gygax. Well, I guess you could in the 70s. I guess I remember some story about he's in the middle of dinner and some guy's calling him. And he goes to his kitchen, answers the phone. The guy wants to know if his drowning rules or something were good, right? Everyone wants that that thought or that comfort of thinking like what I did was right. Like, what do you know? And I think that's why a lot of people like having the rules. And then there's a certain thing of like, yeah, that kind of garage band sort of attitude, a little bit of like punk band of like, that just whatever you do is right. Whatever you do, what is that? What's that like? Aleister Crowley, like what is it like? What is the right is what you do, or I don't know, something like that. I don't know. I don't remember what it is, but okay, let's keep moving. Intertwined with it is the emphasis on player ingenuity over character ability from the same source. Old school PCs are very minimalistic because the character sheet is mostly there for when players make a mistake. Players are not meant to solve problems with die rolls, but with their own ingenuity. Therefore, present them with problems that don't require obscure knowledge, have no simple solution, but have many difficult solutions. Right, so this is the same thing. Okay, this is really more a philosophy thing. Old school characters, old PCs minimalistic because the sheet is mostly there for when players make a mistake. No, I wouldn't agree with that. Sheets are there to track your resources that you're using, that you're having. Sure, you need to track hit points, and you're going to lose hit points when you make a mistake, mostly. But that's not quite right. Are we meant to solve problems with die rolls? Depends on the problem. If you're a cleric and the problem is turning those undead, you're solving it with die rolls. I mean, if I'm a cleric and 3 skeletons, a zombie, and a ghoul show up, they walk into a bar, and I'm there, I can do a bunch of fictional positioning, but at the end of the day, I'm going to wave around my holy symbol and say, get thee behind me and whatever. And I'm going to have to make that turning check, which is a roll. If you're a thief, you're also rolling. If I'm doing roll under attribute, I'm doing it. If I'm doing X and 6, I'm rolling dice. So there are always things that you're going to have to roll dice to do. I've always said, and I still believe that oftentimes as a player, my job as a player is to try to figure out how much can I do without having to get to the dice. What can I get? How far can I get without the GM saying to me, roll dice? Because if I can keep moving, I can keep succeeding, and there's no chance of failing or particularly kind of crit failing sort of thing. But I think, again, they're looking back, right? This is that looking back at, well, why do I like this? And here's the philosophy based on this. I don't think that back in the day, I don't think anybody thought that way about a character sheet when they were designing it. It needed the stuff that you needed. Your character sheet has your spells on it. Your spells aren't there because you failed. They're there because you memorized your spells and you wrote down the spells you had. Your equipment, when the GM looks at you and you say, really, you got 85 feet of rope? Let me see it. Show them your sheet where you got it written in. That's what it is. It was about tracking things. It wasn't just about mistakes. Now, obviously, there is this focus on ingenuity because you have so few skills. You don't have a lot. If I'm a fighter, I played it in my game night with Daniel. Bandits Keep was last night, and I'm a fighter. I have nothing. My sheet is equipment and hit points. So if we're in a situation and there's something to do that isn't really my equipment or hit points, or I have to figure out how to apply my equipment to the situation, yeah, that's ingenuity. I don't have 100 skills to look at and go, okay, this thing falls into this skill. No, I don't. So yes, there is ingenuity there, but I don't think that it's because of anything other than the fact that you just didn't have a bunch of character abilities. Once you start adding in more of those abilities, of course you're going to gravitate towards them. That's only natural that's going to happen. Oh, let me see what's going on in the chat. Ooh, chat is flying by. Someone remember the Aleister Crowley quote. Thank you to Michael Frager again. To do what thou will shall be the whole of the law. That's it. Ian says that 16-year-old Ian was very into knowing the rules. Yeah, I think so. Kyle says I just joined and restarted the stream, so I was looking for more content to explore. Mike Shea has created a tool to scrounge through a bunch of different blog sites for D&D information. Ooh, cool. Kyle, if you have a link, if you could shoot that to me, I'd love to see it. Now, chat might not be the best place to put it because I believe unless Ian can flag it somehow, I think Nightbot may swat down your link like he's Matumbo and you're trying to drive the paint. But if you if you do have it handy, if you could find a way to get to me on social media somewhere else, some way else, I'd be grateful. Michael says there's one line in basic or expert where the manual tells prospective DM in the end if something is not covered by the rules, then decide on a percentage chance of it happening and rolling. Yes, that was kind of so. Michael Frager, yes, there is. I don't remember exactly where it is. I suppose I could look it up. There is basically they tell you. Ryan Smith says they didn't have a Dikembe Mutombo reference on their bingo card. Well, it comes out. They basically tell you that, which I actually appreciate. So somewhere in BX, it basically says, hey, we have a couple different ways you can adjudicate stuff, right? You can do an X and 6, you can roll under attribute, or if those things don't work, and instead you have an idea of jumping across a ravine, because the idea is you always want to give someone a chance, but you may look at it and say, well, 1 in 6 is too much. 16% chance is way too much. I don't want them to be rolling under strength and try to mess around with modifiers to get a number. Because when you start adding modifiers in, really, it's like, well, if I have them roll against strength, but is it -8? Like, you're trying to figure it out. They just say, hey, you know what? Don't worry about it. Just say, look, if you feel like you have an 8% chance to make it across this ravine, then just say roll D100, and if you get 8 or below, or 92 and above, however you want to do it, then do it. And it's great. It gives you these different methods that work. But it can also be confusing because they're not just giving you one way to do it. Yeah, as Michael Ferris says, just pick something and go with it. Right. And the other thing you can do is just talk it out with the players. Like, I'll sit there and say, hey, does this sound about right? I'll read back what they're trying to do. I'll say, okay, so I'll say something like, say one of the guys is a fighter and they decide they're trying to jump across a 40-foot ravine and they seem confident about it, whatever. I'll say, okay, and I'll say, all right, let's lay this out. So you're wearing a pack that's pretty full because you guys are coming out of the dungeon, whatever's happening. You got all this stuff on, right? You have a 20-foot span that you can run. So you're going to run 20 feet, and then you are confident, you can jump whatever, 40, 50 feet or whatever it is and get to the other side. And oftentimes as I'm running this through, I can see the player's face changing because they're realizing like what seemed like this is a no roll. I'm just going to do this in my sleep kind of thing. It's something like, oh gosh. And then maybe I'll even do something like, well, let's see, what is the Olympic record for a long jump? It's 14 feet. Okay. And that's someone who's unladen and they were doing it, in Denver. Okay. Or, somewhere where there's less gravity. Like, all right, well, what are we thinking here? And they say, well, but I've got, 17 strength and 14 dex. Okay. Well, let's just say, what do you think? 10%, 8%, 6%? What are you thinking? Because you're going to be, doubling the Olympic record, but I want to give you a shot. So what do you want to do? So say we say 5% chance, whatever it is, great. So we'll just roll. And if it doesn't, if it's not a number that fits in with X and 6 or a D20, if I end up on 5%, I might just say, well, just roll 20. Roll 20 and you do it. Or even call your roll and roll it that way. So on and so forth. Kyle posted it in the forums. Awesome. I will check that out later. All right. So there's lots of ways to do it. But I'm not trying to say that there isn't an emphasis on player ingenuity. But I think, again, with these philosophical things, you're looking back. The reason why these games emphasize player ingenuity is because characters didn't have a lot of abilities. I don't think that they were thinking. I don't think Gaiax and Arneson were thinking we don't want to give them abilities so that they're ingenious. They just didn't think of them. It just wasn't on their radar. So they just didn't have it. And people just filled in and it seemed okay. At some point it seemed less okay. Thief comes in, other things come in. And people are asking about things and they want certain things like, well, I want my guy to get better, or I want this to happen. I don't want it to just be kind of GM whim when I can trigger this thing or when I can't. So then it's like, okay, well, let's start putting in skills and and skills end up in like BECME or at least the rule cycle. There's some kind of skills involved. I know in second edition there are skills. I don't know if there was I don't remember if there was anything source books for first edition that might have slotted in skills, but again, the philosophies are looking back, but then they're looking back, but then they're creating a new reality when these were the goals kind of all along, when it's not really the case. Not that these goals are bad, but this is not necessarily what things were created to do. Oriental Adventures, maybe. Oh, Heroes of Homebrew uses the Mythic Game Master engine Fate chart with their group. That's awesome. I like that too a lot, and I use it in my prep as well. Okay, so let's keep going. So he quotes the player ingenuity over character ability from Principia, and then continuing on says, so rulings over rules is not just an attitude towards adjudicating various game situations, but also the reason for having simplistic rules. Combat, it's war. Your own fault for not securing overwhelming advantage. Now you toss dice like grenades. Character abilities, no need. Describe what you do, and the GM will adjudicate. But I don't know that that's what they're saying. I don't know if they're saying you don't need character abilities or something. I'm not sure. So I feel like maybe they're reading into it more than they're actually trying to do. But I think what the philosophical part is trying to say is the player should not be begging the dice, which is a good thing anyway. As a player, you should never beg the dice because they're going to fail you. Just like with a GM, you should never say like, oh, well, I'm going to make this some really small chance of the apocalypse happening because I'm never going to roll that 0-1 on this D100. And then you roll the 0-1 on the new. I'm never going to roll 6s 4 times in a row. And then you do. You're always gonna, so you should never beg the rolls. But I think it's more they mean not that the stuff on your sheets or whatever has no meaning whatsoever. Except OSR games do have plenty of strict rules and procedures with no space for player ingenuity. I think I don't agree with that statement either. It's such a blatant contradiction of principle and practice. It's so deeply ingrained, it's taken me years to notice it. These rules cover different areas, often neglected by other playstyles: random encounters, exploration, encumbrance, resource depletion. That's where OSR games innovate and distinguish themselves from one another, not just regular old encounter tables, but hex flowers, overloaded dice, usage dice. Well, okay, so yes, folks have taken different types of random generation and doing it, but I don't think that the rules and procedures are there either that they take away player ingenuity or that there's no space for that. I think there's plenty. I think it's the rules and procedures are usually about setting a consistency and context for the world so that the players can make sense of it and understand the risks and rewards for doing things. I would say it opens up spaces that might not be there. It creates situations where you can apply ingenuity, not removes it. But that's me. It makes sense. These rules help create a sense of pressure of player agency and strategic choice. Do you take the time to search the place and risk another random encounter roll, or do you push and risk triggering a trap or missing out on treasure? That's the essence of OSR, isn't it? Except, if rules are good for informed player choice and agency exploration, why are they a detriment in action and action resolution? Why are tactical combat rules avoided like the plague? Why is the character sheet mostly there for where players make a mistake unless you need to check out how many rations are left? For that matter, why is ingenuity not welcomed in, say, encumbrance management? Innovative mule packing techniques not that interesting? Fair. But are detailed descriptions of searching for traps much better? Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in this stuff, in this segment. All right, so if you have rules and procedures for things, why do we only have rules and procedures for some things? Why are there not rules and procedures for action resolution? Well, the thing is, there are. Like we just went through BX. I could probably try to look it up real quick, but I don't want to stall things out. They give you rules, or they just give you suggestions for how to do it. Maybe they could have been better about saying exactly, but I think there was this kind of thought like, well, you'll find what works best for you. And the focus, I think, modern gaming, and it's not a bad one, is on having a singular mechanic that you can rely on for everything. That did not exist back then. You can chart kind of the rise of, hey, we're just going to kind of use D20. Certainly third edition. I don't know if second edition had moved to kind of D20 for everything, and not only for everything, but always in the same ascending sense of we're rolling and we want to roll high, and we're going to add modifiers against some kind of target number, using that for everything. But the fact that there were different resolution systems that you could use didn't mean that there were no resolution systems. It didn't mean that people thought they were a detriment to it. And then I think this idea that this always bugs me, this idea about tactical combat rules. No one's avoiding tactical combat rules. In say BX, there are tactical combat rules. There are things like you want to make a fighting withdrawal versus running away. You want to do different things. The white box, if you wanted to use the stuff, they say, hey, look at chainmail. There's man-to-man type stuff. There's the troop stuff, which is all about trying to match up your forces against their forces and do stuff. And I will always say that I think that people conflate or confuse having a bunch of options with tactics. In other words, I have 10 abilities, so this makes me a tactically rich experience. Whereas if I have one ability, I have no tactical. My tactical experience is poor. And I disagree with that completely. I mean, people look at it and say, well, look at how tactical and how strategic game Go is. It's this thinking game. Well, Go, you don't have any powers at all. Chess, each one of your pieces has one power. Checkers, you all got the same power. But you can still think of tactics. Like playing tic-tac-toe, you could think of tactics. When I play my daughter, sometimes I'll see if I can bait her into making this move so I can make that move. Tactics is all about that the moves you make have consequences that are important. So if you move to this thing that is meaningful in the situation, that's tactical. Tactical doesn't mean, well, I got 20 different choices I can do. That might be the opposite of tactics. If I'm playing a warlock in 5th edition or whatever, and it's my choices of some kind of flavor of Eldritch Blast, and I can sit in the corner and choose between 30 flavors of Eldritch Blast, that's not really a tactically rich thing. Maybe you could say, well, you could pick the one that's fire against fire creatures, or pick the one that's ice. Well, sure, those are more, maybe one is better suited for that thing, but it's not really tactical. I'm not changing anything. I'm just sitting there, pew, pew, pew. But if I have different things that create different situations, that's tactical. And you don't need a lot for that. You don't need, tactics in warfare, your soldier has basically a kit. It doesn't have 50 different things. You've got your rifle, maybe you got a sidearm, and you're going out there. Is war not tactical because you don't have 800 bits of equipment attached to you? No. Or maybe you got a grenade, a rifle, a sidearm, and maybe a knife if things get to the worst of the worst. That's it. But the whole point of tactics rises out of warfare. And then you go back to ancient warfare. People were still doing tactical situations, even though you had less than that. I got a spear. Maybe I throw it. Maybe I don't even do that. I got a shield, and I'm going to march forward with my crew. There's still tactics. It's not about how much stuff I have. All right, that's ending my rant on that. But so I don't feel like tactical combat rules are avoided. I think that there's just not a lot of abilities, but that doesn't mean that there's not rules. It doesn't mean that doesn't create tactical situations. Tactics does not rely on having a bunch of rules. That's not where tactics comes from. And then in terms of like stuff like, well, why don't you allow ingenuity and encumbrance management? I think there are things for which there's just diminishing returns, or you just get to a point, and this is where you end up having to roll the dice. So let's say I'm going to climb a wall, right? I'm going to climb a wall. Now, maybe there's a situation where the GM can describe the wall, and I can describe how I'm doing it and avoid the die roll. Maybe where I make it plain, or the situation and my response to the situation makes it such a fait accompli that I can climb the wall without making a roll. At some point, I can describe everything I'm doing to maximize the situation for my climbing. I'm still going to have to make the climb check. There's just so much I can do. At the end of the day, there's still, okay, you've got all this stuff. You've got crampons, you've got whatever those things are. You've got those ninja hook claw things. I've got all this stuff. It's like, yeah, man, you still got to make that climbing roll. You still actually have to climb to do it. And the reason why we have to make that roll is because at the end of the day, we've just gotten to the end of what we can determine. We've exhausted our efforts to eliminate the chance that you don't climb the wall. And there's nothing else you can do. There's nothing else to say. You've run through all the stuff, and then it's like, yeah, man, but still, a thing is solid ice. And yeah, you get all this stuff, and sure, that gives you a better chance than most or whatever. But at the end of the day, you still got to roll. And I think at the end of the day, you just have stuff where it's like, look, you can talk about all your way around pack management, but it only gets you so far. And we don't want to, and we're not trying to play a game of pack management. So how far down the pack management rabbit hole do we want to go before it's like, okay, we're done with this, and none of us are pack management experts. So great. So I mean, it's not even a role there. It's like, well, your pack's full. Oh, but I do this, that, the other. Oh, I try to vacuum pack. Oh, okay, your pack's still full. I don't know what to tell you, pal. Your pack's full. Or okay, you can put one more thing in there. Okay, one more thing. All right, now your pack's full. I don't know. There's the as I like to say, that at some point the juice is not worth the squeeze. I think that's it. I don't think it's trying to say that ingenuity is not welcome. If you have a really good solution, I'm willing to listen. But how many good solutions are we going to have? How far is that going to get us? Probably not that far. So why are we wasting time on it? So let's see. And so I would definitely object to saying that ingenuity is not welcome in encumbrance management. It's just people may not be interested in it. There's just places where the people aren't interested in it, and the rules tend to concentrate on the things that are going to be either tense, have tension, or have interest. That's what I would say there. So he continues, not only is the rulings over rules principle applied inconsistently, its pursuit has led the playstyle, how shall I put it delicately, up its own butthole. Okay. Here, for instance, is some advice on getting the most of rulings over rules, followed by a big list of OSR-style challenges that do so. It's good, very manageable, very imaginative. A couple of examples from the list. This glass sphere, 3 feet in diameter, is filled with gems and horrible undead snakes. Nice. There's a tiny octopus inside your stomach, and it's biting you. The room is proofed against magic. The door only opens when a bowl is filled with water from a spring down the hall. The hall is long, vented to volcanic heat, so the water will evaporate before reaching the bowl. Okay, so let's see. I guess he's picking some examples that seem slightly. I mean, look. Yes, there's some stuff that, especially outside whatever the context of these things are. This probably doesn't have any context because it's just kind of challenges. Stuff that doesn't make a lick of sense. And that's fine. Oh, hold on. Let me just go back here. So some stuff on the tactics bit. Brian Smith says the word tactical is used pretty liberally in American advertising. I've seen pants described as tactical. Here's what Homebrew says. The tactics come from the approach to combat and the utilization of the ground and equipment at your disposal. Just having rules doesn't create tactical combat if no one uses them tactically. Yes, I would totally agree with that. Well, I mean, I agree with both of them. I think that you do want to have some rules because you want to, or be able to adjudicate about situations like flanking. But other than that, you don't need much. You really don't. And some things are just self-evident. If you can surround a guy and get 5 hits on him, he can only get 1 hit on one of you. You don't need any special rules for that. And the reward for doing it is the fact that you have a 5-on-1. You've got them surrounded. Same thing. If you can take cover from the archer, do I need a special rule for that? No, as long as I can recognize that the archer can't hit you because you have cover, or it's much harder to hit you. Therefore, the balance of this combat shifts when the archer either cannot hit you very well and you can hit them a lot better, or somebody else can hit them, or whatever you're doing, and they can't hit you. You don't need a lot of rules. You don't need a lot of abilities. You don't need a lot of powers to make that happen. It's just playing the field, and the field being playing the environment and how everything shakes out. Dungeon crawling is contrived as it is. There's a hole in the ground filled with monsters, traps, and treasure, and an entire class of people dedicated to delving into these dungeons. Not a whole lot of examples in mythology or fiction until D&D bled back into fiction through video games, and now half of anime is isekai, filled with precisely that. But to take dungeon crawling and fill it with glass spheres of snakes and gems, stomach octopuses, and water locks in volcanoes, it's not just the classic excuse of a wizard did it. It's a wizard did it so that adventurers could experience OSR style challenges. Well, okay, so sure. I think there are some examples of dungeon crawling in fiction. I don't know. I have to go through the Appendix N stuff. Certainly some of the other things like going on adventures of some style and going for treasures and fighting monsters, stuff like the Jason and the Argonauts and things like that, going after the Golden Fleece. I mean, there are some examples, but yeah, maybe dungeon crawling, yes, is probably contrived as it is. That said, I think picking out 2 blogs and kind of then sort of building a straw man over like, look, sure. But there's also the fact that sometimes get lost is it's a game. And these challenges, though they're goofy, though they're contrived, though they don't make sense, they're fun because it's a game. It's that puzzle when you go into this fight trying to figure out how it works. It's fun. It's a game. That's why. I mean, does there need to be a whole lot more than that? If everyone is enjoying it and it's a game and you enjoy those kinds of challenges, do we need to have more than an excuse of a wizard did it or the gods did it or whatever? Maybe not. He continues, and if you're willing to accept these contrivances in order to experience the playstyle to its fullest, the artificiality of balance encounters of the combat as sport D&D playstyle really shouldn't bother you. It may not be your preference, but it takes just as much suspension of disbelief. Okay, so now he's doing, I'm not sure why he's throwing this in here, but he's basically saying, look, if you're willing to put up with all the contrivances, such as I've just covered above on dungeon crawling and the things within dungeons, then why are you throwing shade at the combat as sport of modern D&D? And again, it's a bit of one of these, I don't know if it's technically a straw man, but maybe it is. But the idea is, well, not everybody is doing that. Like a lot of people aren't, the two have nothing to do with each other. And there's some folks who might not appreciate combat as sport or don't like it, who also would agree that the heavily contrived dungeon crawling, more gaming aspects don't work, and vice versa. I mean, these aren't really connected in the way that they may be saying it is. And I'm not sure why he kind of jumps out there to like go, yeah, and if you don't like 5e, like, why does that bother you? I mean, there's many things, but a lot of it is kind of, well, what are the things we really want to do in the game? And the combat as sport in D&D, one of the results of that is that you spend a lot of time in combat, as people complain about in 5e. And why shouldn't you? It's sport. It's you get in the game, like playing a sporting game, and you want to spend most of the time playing the game and not sitting on the sidelines or waiting at halftime or doing whatever. You want to play as much as possible. Well, in D&D, when you have combat as sport, when everyone wants to utilize their crazy powers and the GM's trying to do all this stuff, and part of the whole thing is, we're going to play it, and it's all going to be, we're trying to create situations where it's always down to the last 2 minutes of the fourth quarter to try to figure out what's going on, where everybody is at their most, it's going to be nail biting and everything down the line. It's going to be long. It's going to be involved. And that's not for everybody. And sometimes it doesn't work. And then you're in a slog where there's no end in sight, and someone's not going to call there's no 9-run rule. So they're not going to call it early. They're just going to make you play through it. Right. Not going to happen. So you can disagree with one without necessarily disagreeing with the other, and they have different. They're not, as I said, they're not like mirror images of each other. They're not opposites. It's either combat as sport or dungeon crawling being contrived. Well, you can kind of have both. I mean, plenty of people will have D&D 5th edition filled with contrived dungeons and then combat as sport, and some people play OSR games with minimal contrivances and whatever. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure why they throw that out there, but it's as if they feel like their audience is necessarily people who hate on 5e for combat as sport. Brian Smith says his article's to the sink of verisimilitude. Oh no. All right. The OSR playstyle works. There's no doubt. People have fun with it. Just so we're clear, I have fun with it too. It works not despite its inconsistencies and contrivances, but because of them. Though its manifestos and principles may suggest otherwise, it is simply an amalgamation of parts and approaches that happen to work well together, not a united, self-consistent design arising from deeper philosophical ideas, a local maxima of fun. So again, I think this is the issue is that the games and the philosophies are not the same. You're playing Cairn or Into the Odd or Knave or BX. They weren't made. People call them OSR and group them together as OSR, but they're all their own games, and they're not made to work with those manifestos and principles. Maybe some of these games it did take into their design some of those manifestos and principles, but they're totally separate. One is the kind of culture that's risen up around these games, and the other one is the games themselves. And just like with 5e, where the rules can say one thing, but the culture can kind of be a little bit different, it's not the same. So I think trying to sort out how to play a particular game or enjoy that game with the principles is kind of a fool's errand, in a way, because the principles can show you this philosophy, but you don't need the philosophy to play. And in fact, you don't need to play it with those philosophies. And you may not even agree with those philosophies, but I think they were trying to kind of give this thing that you can aim for. Hey, aren't these sorts of things wonderful? We're encouraging player ingenuity. We're going rules light. We're doing all these things. These are wonderful goals to have. And yeah, they are. But confusing them with the actual games that get put in OSR, especially because OSR doesn't mean those things for everybody. The term OSR predated those things also. The term OSR doesn't even mean that to everybody. I think it's trying to then just hammer them into each other. Probably not the way to go. Once seen this way, it's easy to imagine games that could have started with the OSR principles and diverged, where the line between rulings and rules is drawn differently. Such games may even exist, and I'm simply ignorant of them. Well, again, I think most of the games exist because they didn't start from the OSR principles. I mean, again, I'd have to go poll people, but I think a lot of people designing games weren't starting from the Principia Apocrypha moving forward. They were probably starting either from scratch or from other things. I don't know if any, do we know of any games that literally were started from the Principia Apocrypha working and then worked out from there? I don't know, but I don't think that's how most of them were done. Certainly, like when I'm working on my thing, I'm not even thinking about the rules and maxims or the principles and maxims such as they are. A game where you have to describe in detail how you render first aid with scores of blog posts and forum threads scoffing at the idea of the heal skill, or worse yet, hit points. Or a game where you have to learn how to identify and use plants in cooking and alchemy with herbalism tables for every occasion. Or a game where you create magic rituals from first principles, balancing various requirements and side effect. And OSR, Ars Magica, OSR Magica, or, well, these things do exist. I mean, there are games that, or supplements or things that go into plants. There are games where you create magic rituals from first principles. So it's interesting that they're suggesting that this is like a thing that hasn't existed when it has. I mean, Barbarians of Lemuria and others have magic rituals from first principles, which I appreciate a lot. I know there's supplements and different books that have wilderness stuff that have herbalism, and there are things that have herbalism tables and all sorts of things. But I think ultimately we lean in towards having the roles for things that we don't have a lot of practical knowledge of, or maybe our idea, because I don't have a lot of practical knowledge of warfare. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a warrior. I've never been in a conflict of any sort. But I feel like I have some knowledge from reading whatever. There are things that I have no knowledge of whatsoever, or I don't want to, such as pack management. Don't have knowledge there. So I don't want, and I don't have interest in it. So the idea of having a game that's centered on doing a whole lot of brain space or game time on pack management doesn't interest me. If it interests enough people, someone will make a game about it, and maybe somebody already has. Michael Frigger says, pure rulings over rules is free Kriegspiel games. I guess, though now someone can explain me. Maybe Michael Fraker, you can. I need to investigate it further, because my understanding of Kriegspiel as a thing in terms of its origins wasn't so much that there wasn't rules. It was that there was one person who was going to take ownership of the rules, and they were that kind of rules expert. They were a rules expert. So instead of, in the case of war games, that you and whoever's playing the other side, and then potentially a referee to sort out conflicts, would have to go through and reference all kinds of stuff and, stopping thing, because these things would take a long time. Oh, I did this maneuver. I'm counting with this maneuver. What are the effects of these things? And then you're looking through your rules and regulations and whatever you're doing. And, okay, and this takes a while. It slows everything down. That instead it would be that we're going to rely on the referee to know all this stuff, much like in a sports game. Everybody, people know the rules of basketball, but in terms of how they're relating things, right, you rely on the referees to control the flow of the game, to make the necessary calls. You stepped on the line, so it's a 2-pointer instead of a 3-pointer. That was a foul. So that everyone else can just be in the flow of the game, and you're not stopping every 5 minutes because two guys are looking at a third guy saying, hey, man, he stepped on the line, and then arguing about it. It's the referee does that. So that was my understanding of the free Kriegspiel, at least in its origins. So now when people are talking about FKR games now? Is it that there are no rules, or is it that there is that one referee who, as the sort of master of rules, who will do all the adjudication, have been giving that responsibility, or that have been acknowledged as such by the players, so that the players are not going to bother with the rules or don't have to, and they'll just take the rulings as they come. That's what I'm curious about, because I see people doing like, well, there's no rules, but that wasn't my understanding of at least the origin. But I have no experience in FKR, so I don't know if I have the understanding wrong or something is going on. Ian says, isn't FKR all rulings, or at least you don't actually start out with any rules? I'm not sure, Ian. Michael Frager says, the way Chris McDowell and others in the blogosphere made it seem like the referee used his best judgment to make a percentage type roll. The participants would put forth their aims and what resources or strengths they have to back it up, and the ref takes all the players' actions and strengths into account to determine chance. I see. So, I mean, there's some kind of, I have to imagine there are some rules in there somewhere. Otherwise, it would be totally, if we were just going, you want some kind of consistency. So I imagine you have rules. So maybe that's not far off what I was thinking. I'll have to read more. Into it, because I am interested in it, and I really do like the idea of, as a player, just saying, you know what, I'm not even going to have anything. I mean, maybe a sheet to remind me of what I have, but I'm just going to let the GM. And I've done this. I know back when I was doing more play-by-post stuff, I was playing in there. I know some GMs who ran games where they made all the rolls, and you would simply say, hey, I attack the goblin or do whatever, and then they would just come back to you and say, okay. And I know one guy, he would post the rolls, another guy wouldn't. So it would just be like, okay, you hit, whatever. And that worked fine. And it meant that you didn't have to really know the mechanics. You didn't have to, of course, you wanted to know, am I good at this? Am I terrible at that? Where am I? But ultimately, you could just kind of get in the flow of playing, and sort of, flow in terms of it's play by post. It was play by post, so not the same kind of flow, but you could just sort of play and not have to worry about that stuff. But I am interested in learning more about FKR as it is. Tag 1080 says, the basis of free rule sets is a standardized expectation across all players. In a war game, that part is assumed. In RPGs, I think it needs to be more explicit for it all to work. But yeah, that makes sense. All right. Let's see. I got a little bit more time. I don't know how long this article is. Oh, that's the principles. That's not what I meant. This one. How long is this one? Oh, that's not too long. Can I give this one a quick-ish read? So this is from the Augury Ignored blog. This is auguryignored.wordpress.com. This article is posted on September 5th. It's called In Search of Perfection, Hindered by Reflection. Shea Webster's recent blog post titled Why Buy Another Game tackles the situation common to the RPG enthused, the acquisition of more and more games and systems. The reflections he shares are worth discussing. I strongly urge to read the post itself, which maybe we will next time, but I don't have time right now. But to summarize, Shea articulates a feeling I think many share, I certainly do, of searching for some abstract measure of perfection among available games, and in the process, ironically disconnecting from the RPG hobby because they can't seem to replicate that original spark that drew them in and fired their imagination. I certainly went through a similar journey in my post D&D 3.5 period. I was sampling system left and right. I leaned towards universal systems like GURPS and Savage Worlds because I then still believe that I could, in fact, find that perfect one-size-fits-all rule set. This white whale system needed to do two things. It needed to match my imagination, which I, like many adolescents, held as far more amazing than it really was, and it needed to support all the types of play I wanted to explore. Dungeon crawling, domain building, interpersonal drama, deep inner conflict, exploration, space and castles, and kaiju, and magic and psionics, and existentialist dread, and immersive world building, whatever was the geeky flavor of the week for younger me. Naturally, this search was destined to fail, and I tended to principally blame myself for the failure of my games. Some was missing, I'd always think. That's because the system is bad, I'd then reason, and I'd tinker and try out something else. And then, feeling once more let down, the cycle would repeat. Playing role-playing games is an intrinsically social endeavor, solo RPGs accepted. Thinking about role-playing games, on the other hand, can easily turn into a solitary exercise in reflection. Bias and perceived inadequacies in ourselves color these reflections. For someone like myself, predisposed to anxious and depressive thought patterns, the result cocktail is often toxic. A constant sense of not doing well enough looms over game thoughts and eventually over the actualized game itself. We drown in anxieties, and in a way, we forget how to play with earnestness and excitement. Why? because we don't trust ourselves to do as well as we'd, and by extension, we don't trust others to do well. This isn't some misanthropic or deliberate mistrust, merely a consequence of toxic brain patterns, and it's ludicrously destructive. I think I do agree with at least some of this. Here's what Homer says that middle-aged man in the 21st century don't need a game for existential dread. That's probably true. Ryan Smith says they prefer the Outback Steakhouse mode of play. No rules, just right. Nice. Let's see. So, yes, I do think that you can think too much on it. I think that happens often on the internet where people are getting so absorbed in all these thoughts about the game that it makes the game itself either seem less, oh, the math is not right here, so this is unplayable kind of thing, or, oh, I can't stand it because this other thing. And it's like, well, you could probably just ignore that other thing and just play it, but the thoughts of such and these things that you find can just overwhelm. Think about it. In a social hobby where the central actualizing activity is about personal interaction with other individuals, we trust neither ourselves nor our peers to help attain the impossibly high standard our neuroses set for us. So we look to other factors for reassurance. We look to the setting, the system, the rules. We look to the game as a product and an item, unrealized in terms of its intended use. And time again, we feel let down because we fail to engage with the glue that holds our entire hobby together, connections with others and trust in them. Role-playing is pretty much a form of social alchemy, and in our private ruminations, that sociality can be neglected and forgotten because we'd rather focus on things we can master and control, rules and systems. They mean something and are anything but immaterial to enjoying our hobby, yet they are ultimately merely tools for the experience of connecting and playing. And playing earnestly, openly, excitedly, and with empathy is liberating beyond words. Over the years, I've started to regain trust in myself and my gaming peers. I still buy more systems and rule sets than I have time to run, of course, but I've mostly ditched the twisted, compulsory undertone. I've played with wonderful people who have reinvigorated my faith in what gaming can do, and I cannot express my gratitude to them properly. The perfect game isn't the one we theorize about or uncover in some new system or book. The perfect game is the one that materializes in play with other people in the creative and social vortex, mind meld, alchemy, rawness of roleplay. And I definitely agree with that. Tag says, ooh, next session I'm going to have a monster and still existential dread on my PCs. Thanks for the idea. Oh, that'll be good. I mean, I agree with this. I totally agree. I think that people will just grind on rules and things, but it ultimately, the rules are tools for, as I said, this interfacing, interacting with other individuals to create an experience. And sure, the rules can add to that. They can take away from that. You want to look for the additive ones. You want to try to minimize the ones that aren't helping you towards your ends. But the rules are not ends in themselves. And as everyone's experienced, people will say, oh, you can't play this game. This game's horrible for doing this. And someone will pop up and say, yeah, but I did with my group. It was fine. Of course. Because ultimately, whether the rules helped or hindered in that endeavor, the endeavor is not about the rules. It's about that resulting experience. And you have the right group of people, you can have fun with just about anything. As people who have had fun, playing Monopoly and stuff, which I don't think Monopoly in a vacuum is a good game, but I've had lots of fun playing Monopoly, and I think everyone else has, and horrible times too, because it's all about the group and circumstances and whatever. And yeah, there is not going to be a perfect game. Not going to be one. Well, that's a great way to end it. There's going to be no perfection. The perfection is merely you can get as close to as you can through experience with others. Playing earnestly, openly, excitedly, and with empathy. I agree. Here's what Homer says, to paraphrase Bruce Lee, take what you like and leave the rest. Absolutely. And then Tag says, I think when you're playing and a player asks a question you don't have an answer for, there's an inclination to come up with every possible answer for next session, but that is a toxic mindset. Yeah, I think it's that not having faith in ourselves or feeling that the player doesn't have faith in us. That kind of, we have to keep looking and looking. I mean, I think it's fine to come up with a rule, because sometimes you do a rule and you're like, I don't know if this was what I want, but I did it. Yeah, it's fine. But yes, we don't need to get caught up in that stuff too much. Did it make it through the situation? Yes. Is anyone complaining? No. Then why do we need to worry about it? Move on and move on up. All right, folks. Well, have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you end up watching or listening to this. I'm going to jet. Have a great weekend, everybody, if you're here now, or whenever your next weekend happens to be. Game on, everybody, and I will talk to you later. Bye now.